In 1274, the largest invasion fleet the world had ever seen sailed for Japan. Over 30,000 Mongol and Korean warriors on 900 ships. They'd conquered most of Asia. They'd devastated China, Korea, and Central Asia. Japan should have been easy, but the Mongols had never fought a typhoon before, and they'd never met samurai who refused to surrender. This is the story of how Japan survived two massive invasion attempts, not through superior military tactics, but through geography, weather, and what the Japanese came to call the divine wind, Kamikaze. And it teaches us something crucial about the limits of military power when you don't understand the battlefield. Let me start with why Kublai Khan wanted Japan in the first place. By 1260, the Mongols had conquered more territory than any empire in history. Genghis Khan's descendants ruled from Eastern Europe to Korea. They defeated every army they faced. But Kublai Khan had a problem: legitimacy. He declared himself Emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty, but he needed to prove he was worthy of the title. Chinese emperors historically demanded tribute from neighboring states, including Japan. So Kublai Khan sent envoys to Japan, demanding they submit and pay tribute. The Japanese response was essentially no. More specifically, the shogun, Japan's military dictator, refused to even meet with the envoys. This was an insult Kublai Khan couldn't ignore. You don't conquer the largest empire in history by letting small island nations disrespect you. So he decided to invade. The first invasion came in 1274. The Mongols assembled a fleet of 900 ships carrying between 30 to 40,000 soldiers. This was a combined Mongol-Chinese and Korean force. The Mongols brought their cavalry warfare tactics. The Chinese brought naval expertise. The Koreans contributed ships and soldiers. It was a multinational invasion force that should have been unstoppable. They landed on Tsushima Island, a small island between Korea and Japan. The local samurai garrison fought fiercely, but was overwhelmed. The Mongols then moved to Iki Island and did the same thing, slaughtered the defenders, moved on. Then they reached Kyushu, the southernmost of Japan's main islands. This is where things got interesting. The samurai way of warfare in 1274 was nothing like Mongol tactics. Japanese samurai were trained for individual combat. They'd ride out, announce their name and lineage, challenge an enemy to single combat, and fight one-on-one. It was ritualized, honor-based, and completely ineffective against Mongol mass tactics. The Mongols fought as units. They used coordinated cavalry charges, feigned retreats to draw enemies into ambushes, and employed weapons the Japanese had never seen, including primitive bombs made from gunpowder that exploded and scattered shrapnel. These weren't powerful enough to kill many soldiers directly, but the noise, smoke, and fire terrified the samurai horses. The first day of fighting went badly for Japan. The Mongols pushed the samurai back, secured a beachhead, and prepared to advance inland. The Japanese were retreating. The invasion seemed to be succeeding. Then that night, a storm hit. Not a full typhoon, but bad weather with strong winds and rough seas. The Mongol fleet was anchored off the coast, crowded together, not prepared for a storm. Ships dragged anchors, collided with each other. Some were driven onto rocks. By morning, the fleet was in disarray. The Mongol commanders made a fateful decision: withdraw. They didn't know how long the storm would last. They didn't know Japanese reinforcements might arrive. They'd already suffered some ship losses, so they retreated back to Korea. Japan was saved, but not by military victory, by weather. Kublai Khan wasn't done. He sent more envoys to Japan demanding submission. The shogun executed them. This was basically a declaration of war, and Kublai Khan began preparing for a second, much larger invasion. The Japanese didn't waste the reprieve. They knew the Mongols would come back, so they built a defensive wall along the coast of Hakata Bay, the most likely invasion point. They fortified positions. They changed their military tactics, abandoning one-on-one combat for coordinated group fighting. The samurai learned from their mistakes. The second invasion came in 1281, 7 years after the first. And this time, Kublai Khan wasn't taking chances. He assembled two separate fleets. The Eastern Fleet, sailing from Korea, had 900 ships and 40,000 soldiers. The Southern Fleet, sailing from southern China, had 3,500 ships and 100,000 soldiers. Combined, this was the largest amphibious invasion in history until D-Day in 1944. The numbers are staggering. 4,400 ships, 140,000 soldiers. For context, Japan's total samurai population was maybe 100,000 warriors in the entire country. The Mongols brought an army larger than Japan's entire military class. The plan was for both fleets to arrive simultaneously and overwhelm Japanese defenses. But the Southern Fleet was delayed. The Eastern Fleet arrived first and had to wait for the Southern force. This gave Japan time. The Japanese didn't fight a conventional battle. They couldn't. They were outnumbered. Instead, they used guerrilla tactics. Small boats would row out at night, attack Mongol ships, set fires, kill crews, then escape. It wasn't enough to destroy the fleet, but it kept the Mongols off balance, unable to establish a secure beachhead. The defensive wall the Japanese had built worked. Mongol forces tried to land multiple times and were repelled. The samurai had learned their lesson. They fought as units now, not individuals. They used terrain advantages. They made every meter of coastline costly. But the Japanese were slowly losing. They couldn't hold out forever against a force this size. The Southern Fleet arrived, and now the full Mongol force was assembled. They had overwhelming numbers. They just needed to land their army, and Japan was finished. Then, on August 15th, 1281, a typhoon hit. Not a storm, a full typhoon. Winds over 100 miles per hour, waves 30 feet high, and the Mongol fleet, crowded in Hakata Bay, was directly in its path. The Mongol ships were built for rivers and coastal waters, not open ocean storms. They were flat-bottomed, designed to beach easily. They weren't designed to survive a typhoon. According to Japanese accounts, the storm lasted 2 days. When it was over, the Mongol fleet was destroyed. Most of the ships were sunk, wrecked on shore, or scattered. Soldiers who made it to land found themselves stranded without supplies or reinforcements. The Japanese hunted them down. The exact death toll is unknown, but estimates range from 60 to 80% of the invasion force. Possibly 100,000 soldiers drowned or were killed. It was one of the deadliest naval disasters in history, and it ended Mongol ambitions to conquer Japan forever. The Japanese called the typhoon Kamikaze, the divine wind. They believed the gods had protected Japan. Shinto priests claimed their prayers had summoned the storm. The idea took root in Japanese culture that Japan was protected by divine forces, that the nation was special and couldn't be conquered. This belief would have consequences 600 years later. During World War II, when Japan was losing and needed a miracle, they revived the concept of kamikaze, sending suicide pilots to crash their planes into American ships, hoping for divine intervention to save the nation again. It didn't work the second time. But let's focus on the medieval period. Why did the Mongols fail? Not just because of storms, though that was the immediate cause. They failed because they didn't understand maritime warfare in that environment. The Mongols were the greatest land-based military force in history. Their cavalry tactics revolutionized warfare. But ships aren't horses, and the ocean isn't a steppe. The Mongols should have known better. Their Chinese and Korean allies should have warned them about typhoon season. August is peak typhoon season in that region. Any experienced sailor would know not to keep a fleet anchored in exposed waters during that time. But military arrogance led them to believe they could overcome any obstacle through sheer force. Compare this to the successful naval invasions in history. The Normans conquering England in 1066, for example. William the Conqueror waited for favorable weather, sailed quickly, and landed before the English could fully mobilize. He understood the risks and minimized them. The Mongols didn't. They assembled their fleet, sailed into dangerous waters during typhoon season, and sat there waiting for weeks. It's almost as if they were asking to be destroyed by a storm. Japan's survival changed Asian history. If the Mongols had conquered Japan, the archipelago would have become part of the Yuan dynasty. Japanese culture, language, and identity would have been absorbed or suppressed. There would be no samurai tradition, no distinctly Japanese Buddhism, no isolation period that preserved unique Japanese culture. The Japan we know wouldn't exist. The failed invasions also bankrupted Kublai Khan's regime. Building two massive fleets and losing both, along with over 100,000 soldiers, strained even the Mongol Empire's resources. Some historians argue this contributed to the eventual collapse of the Yuan dynasty in China a century later. There's a broader lesson here about the limits of military power. The Mongols conquered nearly everything they touched on land. They defeated larger armies, wealthier kingdoms, more technologically advanced civilizations. But the ocean didn't care about their reputation. The typhoon didn't respect their military achievements. Nature doesn't negotiate. Modern militaries understand this better. Naval operations today factor in weather patterns, ocean conditions, and seasonal risks. Amphibious assaults are planned months in advance with contingencies for weather. The U.S. invasion of Normandy in 1944 was delayed because of weather. Eisenhower knew what the Mongols apparently didn't. You don't fight nature. You work with it or wait it out. Japan learned a different lesson. They became convinced they were divinely protected. This led to centuries of isolation, believing they didn't need to engage with the outside world because the gods would protect them. That belief only ended when Commodore Perry sailed into Tokyo Bay in 1853 with steam-powered warships and demanded Japan open to trade. Turns out divine protection doesn't work against gunboat diplomacy. The story of the Mongol invasions is ultimately about hubris. The most successful conquerors in history thought they could overcome any obstacle. They assembled the largest invasion fleet ever seen. They brought overwhelming force, and the ocean destroyed them twice. Not through Japanese skill or bravery, though the samurai fought well. Through storms that anyone familiar with the region should have anticipated. 2,500 years of military history teaches us the same lesson over and over. Know your battlefield. Understand your environment. Respect forces you can't control. The Mongols forgot that, and it cost them everything.